Welcome to the Docketing Excellence webinar series, which is sponsored by Black Hills IP and the SLW Institute. Black Hills IP is an accurate, efficient, and cost-effective US-based IP docketing and paralegal service provider. The SLW Institute is an educational wing created by the Schwegman, Lundberg, and Woessner firm, which aims to provide insightful and useful information to the IP community. For this webinar series, we have pulled together docketing experts and managers from the Schwegman firm, Black Hills IP, and their respective clients and customers to help educate on key docketing challenges and issues and share best practices on how to overcome them. The Docketing Excellence webinar series is free. There are about 2 webinars per month through May 2017. To see a complete list of webinar topics and to register for future webinars, go to the Webinars tab of the Black Hills IP website, which is www.blackhillsip.com. The webinar that we are presenting today is the second in the series. Today's topic is IP management data integrity, how to ruin the reliability of IP data. We have allowed for time for questions at the end of the webinar, but just so you know, questions can be submitted using the Q&A button on the control bar on your screen at any time. So during the presentation, if you have questions, you can go ahead and submit them, and those will be held in the queue until the end of the presentation. The presenters today are myself, Shakalatsky-Carrion, Mary O'Malley, and Tyler Nasedlik. I am Ann McCracken, the president of Black Hills IP. I'm a patent attorney with 19 years experience in patent prosecution. I was a partner at the Schwegman firm for 10 years, and I also was a full-time law professor and directed the patent prosecution program at Franklin Pierce Law Center for 5 years. That's now part of the University of New Hampshire. Z, can you introduce yourself?
Hello, everyone. Welcome. My name is Shakalatsky-Carrion. I am the docketing manager at Schwegman, Lundberg, and Woessner. I've been at SLW for almost 12 years and part of the docketing department for 6 years. I enjoy very much being part of this team.
Thank you, Z. Mary, can you introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Mary O'Malley. I am the patent program manager at eBay. I've been in eBay since 2005, and before that I worked as a paralegal in both law firms and corporations. I also taught patent prosecution for paralegals at both Santa Clara University and West Valley College. And at eBay, I'm responsible for the docketing software and other tools that we use in our patent department, some of which we license, such as Foundation IP, and others which we've built internally. I'm responsible for patent procedures, best practices, and day-to-day operations on the paralegal side.
Thank you. Tyler, can you introduce yourself?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Tyler Nasedlik. I've been practicing patent law for about 20 years now. The last 5 years have been with Schwegman Lundberg, and prior to that, for about a dozen years, I was with Boston Scientific Corporation in a variety of chief patent counsel roles. Nice to meet everyone.
Great. Z, can you start off today's presentation?
Yeah, to start off, there are several different ways that an organization may use the data in their IP management system. Some examples are manage filing and prosecution of IP assets, maintain an inventory and track status of IP assets, track critical deadlines for US and foreign filings, track critical deadlines for responding to PTO actions, pay patent maintenance fees and annuities, renew trademarks, identify infringed patents and trademarks, budgeting, reporting, taxes if funds are allocated across jurisdictions based on IP license fees, pay inventor rewards.
Mary, during your introduction, you mentioned that you use Foundation IP. Can you tell us how you use the data in your Foundation IP system at eBay?
Sure. We use Foundation IP a bit differently than they do in law firms. So in addition to monitoring the usual USPTO due dates, we spend a great deal of time on the docketing of disclosures and tracking disclosure process, processing patent awards for our inventors once the applications are actually filed and when they issue. And a big part of our job is providing metrics for our directors and senior executives, generating reports for our patent committees, and then also taking responsibility for maintenance fees once a patent issues. An interesting thing about our system is that we have both law firms and Black Hills IP entering patent data into our system, and we rely on outside vendors for 100% of the data that's entered into our system once an application is filed.
Thanks, Mary. Tyler, can you talk about either the IP management system that you used at BSC or in your current role, how some of your current clients use their systems?
Yeah, so I think, I guess what I'd like to tap into is the reporting piece. Mary touched on that, and we've used the IP, kind of data in the IP management system to do sort of what I call traditional end of the year type reports on number of matters filed or number of matters issued, and it could be by technology area. You could do updates like that quarterly. All of that comes from data that's kind of housed and stored in our Foundation IP system. The other one, which I've found really important in sort of managing the legal side of the business, is monitoring trends and metrics with regard to patent prosecution workflow. So in the past, we've set up Foundation IP to track time between receiving an invention disclosure form to the time in which that form is approved or denied by a patent review committee, and then the time it takes from approval to getting it to outside counsel, and then from outside counsel to having it filed. And we would track timing and metrics with regard to all of those activities, and then by measuring that, you can manage it. So you can kind of see if you've got a backlog of invention disclosures or applications, or perhaps it's a particular person or group who's having trouble keeping up with the work that's being done. You can sort of intervene and make sure nothing kind of goes off the rails. So that's where I've seen Foundation IP being really helpful from kind of the client side.
So everybody, it's interesting, everybody uses these systems in different ways, but no matter how you're using the system, the data that's in the system is critical for that. Z, can you take us to the next slide?
Yeah, in this next slide, we will discuss some common IP data omissions and errors. These include IP assets missing from database, incomplete data for an individual IP asset, for example, wrong serial numbers or patent trademark numbers, wrong assignee or licensee listed, wrong inventors, missing PTO actions, and incorrect status of assets.
Yeah, the only thing I would add there is when I was just kind of looking at the slides, wrong dates. A lot of what's put into these systems is dates, filing dates, issue dates, docket dates, and those can either be incomplete or there could be a typo, which can have a significant impact.
Yeah, that's critical, Tyler. Thank you. And Mary, anything for you on this?
No, I think you guys have covered this pretty well.
Okay. Okay, then Z, let's go on.
The next slide lists how errors can be introduced to an IP management system in many different ways, including first-time data entry in IP database through simple human error. When data is transferred from one database to another, for example, a human error in transfer from a corporate to a law firm database. Or, as another example, important priority information is omitted from previous counsel. When assets are sold and lists of assets are exchanged in the sale would be another example. And when status events are improperly recorded, when instructions are miscommunicating regarding trademark renewals or patent annuities fees. This is like the example that Anne mentioned in the last webinar, where the client says that they are responsible for payment of annuities, but yet the client still expects the law firm to remind them of annuity due dates.
Good. Tyler or Mary, do you have any other examples of ways that errors can be introduced to an IP management system?
Yeah, I mean, I guess my comment would be on the kind of the human side of things, where I've seen issues. You know, there's a lot of it's a lot of detailed work, and where I've seen issues is when there's too much work for any one person or a group of people to do, kind of to receive the amount of incoming material that needs to be docketed or uploaded into the foundation IP system, or where individuals are working too fast and you know, making errors because they're working too fast.
Good. Those are good examples. Mary, anything else?
I'd like to give an example of how errors can affect you. And
Sure.
people may know that eBay and PayPal were one company and we split last year. And prior to the split, we didn't pay a lot of attention to assignment data. You know, we were more focused on dates and things like that. So we knew we were filing assignments and we assumed they were somewhere with our outside counsel. So they weren't consistent in our database. And when it came time to split assets, which was a huge job, assignments became a big issue. So we had to, you know, we were confronted with this huge split. We had to spend a significant amount of time auditing our assignee data, correcting the information in our database before we could actually begin, you know, the work of splitting up our portfolio. So I just want to stress that assignments are critical and that, you know, people should pay attention to them and make sure they're correct in their database.
And that's a great lead into the next slide, Mary, which is consequences of errors. So that was you had a lot of consequences when you were really under the gun in the corporate split because of the information not being in the database. So Z, can you take us to the next slide?
Here, we will see there are many consequences of errors in IP management system data, including important assets may be inadvertently abandoned or even lost altogether. Assignments may be out of order, complicating asset transfers or assertions, just like what Mary mentioned in her example. Inventors may not be properly paid pursuant to corporate incentive policies or country requirements. Critical dates may be missed, which we had mentioned prior in our other webinar, and reports are inaccurate.
Tyler or Mary, can you talk more on consequences?
Yeah, Mary, did you have anything? I know you talked a little bit about the assignment piece. I didn't know if you were going to add on this one or not.
No, I think I covered in the last one. I maybe jumped the gun there a little bit.
I made a couple notes on this slide. First, I think, you know, you can't underestimate sort of the costs to double check or correct the work. If a date's in the system wrong, typically you have one or more people that are wondering, you know, if the date's accurate, and then they have to go back to the original document and see what the date is, and you could miss deadlines. So you get, I mean, you kind of get just a general loss of productivity, a loss of time, and sometimes if you missed dates, you're going to be paying expenses for that as well. So there's a cost to sort of having to go back and look at something a second time to correct it. Tax implications. I think taxes were mentioned on the first slide. I think it's the point I wanted to bring up here is that when you abandon an asset, you abandon a patent, typically that triggers a write-off of the accrued expenses for that patent. And you can, obviously, if you've abandoned something and you didn't mean to, then you've got a write-off that was unexpected. And if you don't track your spending relative to your patent assets very well, you could have, even if you intentionally decide to abandon a patent, you could have a write-off that's of a different amount. On the assignments, maybe this kind of taps into Mary's earlier point. If you've got it indicated as there's an assignment for a matter in your database, and there hasn't been an assignment, or the assignment's not fully executed by all the inventors, that can create some really serious issues down the road. Typically, they come up when you're about to assert the patent, or you're going to sell the patent, as an eBay's case, or when they split off. And at that point in time, you could have inventors that are no longer with the company. They may not be friendly to the company. There may be consultants that are no longer consulting. And now you're asking them to assign a right. And in some cases, they may not want to do that, or they may ask for additional money. So it can be a really big headache. If you don't have your assignments in order, you can also have some priority issues with regard to international filing and so forth. And then the final comment I had on this one was just with regard to small companies. It's really important to keep in mind that the IP assets for smaller companies can be pretty material to the business. In some cases, you may have lists of patent assets attached to shareholder documents or fundraising documents, and all of that may have serial numbers and filing dates, and whether it's issued or abandoned or pending. With the assets being material, it's really important to have all that information correct. So those are just a few of the thoughts I had on this particular slide.
Well, thank you, Tyler. And that makes me wonder then, what percentage of data corruption renders IP data completely unreliable in your system? I think if confidence is lost in the data as a whole, all of the data is going to be perceived to be unreliable, even if only a relatively small percentage is indeed incorrect. So what's the percentage of erroneous data that tips the data from reliable to unreliable? And I would say generally a data set that is less than 95% accurate renders all data in that data set suspect. Ideally, though, data should be at least 99.99% accurate, meaning, you wouldn't want more than 1 in every 100,000 records to be materially incomplete or corrupt. But there isn't a right answer to this question. So I'm curious, first of all, Tyler, how you feel or what you think about this, and then Mary, your thoughts on this.
Yeah, I'm not sure how to answer this. I think it's an interesting question. I think a lot of it depends on sort of how important the asset is. If it's a licensed patent or a patent you might assert, and you've got a bar date in there that you miss, for example, that's unacceptable, whether that's the only data point that's inaccurate or not. So, it's a little bit, for me, it depends on how you're using the data, how important the asset is, and how the if the data's inaccurate, how that might affect the reports you're running and so forth. So it's a little hard for me to kind of categorize it based on percentages. It's a good question, though.
I would take that even one step further. I consider IP data, ideally it would be 100%, right? It's important data, but there's also another aspect to consider besides dates and things like that. We are providing, statistics and metrics to our management and even the board of directors. And I do not want to go in, I don't want to provide data or go into a meeting with data that is not 100% correct. Our reputation is on the line as well. So the information in our database needs to be spot on from my perspective.
Sure, and there is no correct answer. If I was still teaching, this would be a great topic for a law review article if I had the time to write one.
Ann, I was going to say I couldn't agree with Mary more. It's, these errors can range from sort of embarrassing to material, and if you're presenting reports to upper management, and let's say it's simple information like how many patents did you file in a particular area, or how many did you get issued? And you got to go back and say, well, it wasn't 45, it was only 34. I mean, I guess it calls into question the sort of the confidence or the trust level in the legal function, which is a huge impact when you're corporate counsel.
True. Yeah, very good point. Excellent points. Z, can you take us to the next slide?
Yeah, so now let's discuss the most common places that data errors are introduced. These would be the clerical errors from unreliable data entry by corporate personnel in corporate IP system, and errors introduced by law firms doing manual data updates in a corporate system. The first one is referring to the clerical errors. Some employees are more simply error prone when it involves data entry. In addition, temporary data entry clerks from temporary agencies often have high error rates. So that's quite some issues that we encounter often. And in regards to law firms updating a corporation's IP management system manually, law firm personnel are often unfamiliar with their client system, which increases the likelihood of errors.
Good point, Z. And even if the law firm is familiar with the corporation's IP management system, the law firm personnel may not be familiar with the specific templates or procedures used in that corporation system. I've also seen instances where law firms have viewed updating a corporation's IP management system as a data entry type of a job rather than a docketing job, and had a lower level administrative person doing the work rather than a highly trained, skilled docketer doing the work. So Z, let's go to the next slide. Now that we've talked about some ways that errors can be introduced into a system, let's focus on ways to make sure that the data in your IP management system is error-free and reliable. One of the first steps is to enter data correctly. Checklists are a great tool for that. I'm a big believer in checklists. I talked about that in the last webinar. The second step that you can do is to verify critical data against an independent source on a regular basis. So what's considered critical in your data is going to depend on how you use the data in your IP management system, and Mary and Tyler have talked a lot about different uses. Mary and Tyler, what are some of the things that people can do to avoid errors in their data?
Mary, you want me to fit? So I guess the two comments that I was going to make. One would be training. You can't emphasize training enough. It's critical with new hires and temporary workers. I think Z mentioned that a lot of new hires and temporary workers do a lot of clerical data entry, and training them on what they need to look for and what they need to input is really important. And then just to reemphasize the sort of the verification, I think if you go back and even just take just pull out certain data points and check for their accuracy and do that periodically, you can sort of get a sample and give you an idea about how accurate your data is. And then obviously if you've got some inaccuracies, you can go back and figure out if it was training or if it was overwork or distraction or whatever it might be that caused the original error.
Yeah, I think the distraction is a big one. I know a lot of paralegals in corporations in particular are doing a lot of other things besides docketing. So sometimes docketing is, pushed to the end of the day when you're tired, or you're doing it in bits and pieces. So I think distraction is a huge cause of errors. So having dedicated time to do your docketing, making sure that it's important, that people don't interrupt you, and also stressing the verification that's been talked about here. We have set up reports that run periodically, that will point out that there's blank data, for instance, in fields, missing data. And also, if it's possible to have a third party review, maybe, if there are two paralegals, you review each other's work, or for instance, we use Black Hills IP to do verification of our data on a regular basis. So I think verification and distraction are two huge areas.
Thank you, Mary. And let's talk more about techniques for verifying data, because you're right. The verifying your data on a regular basis is critical, and you can do that manually or in an automated way. And you mentioned both. So manually verifying the data can work for smaller portfolios, but for large portfolios, it's just not practical to have someone review the records and manually check them against the original document or the file, or go and look them up one by one in a public database such as PAIR. So for a larger portfolio, it's most efficient if you can use automation to electronically compare your data against an independent data source. That data source could be PAIR, it could be InPDOC, it could be another docketing system, it could even be something like a public assignment records database. There's a number of companies that have technology to extract data from public databases like PAIR and InPDOC, and that's what I'm talking about when I talk about scraping data. So for example, the USPTO PAIR data can be scraped by extracting information for all matters associated with a particular customer number, if you want to make sure that everything on your customer number is in your database. You could also go and scrape USPTO data by looking and pulling data based on application numbers. If you had particular applications you needed to verify data for, you can scrape data based on application numbers. In either instance, after your portfolio data has been scraped, then you compare it electronically to the data in your IP management system and flag any discrepancies. Verifying the data in your system by comparing it to data that's scraped from a public database is a very good technique for verifying your data. Another way to verify your data is to compare it to another system. For example, you could electronically compare the data in your system to the data in your law firm's docketing system and identify discrepancies. Yet another way to verify your data is to compare records based on ownership. So this is a little bit different way of coming at a verification project, but for example, you could start by searching an external assignment database like the USPTO's assignment database, or for international matters, InPDOC has some assignee information. Find all the patents that are assigned to your company in that database, and then compare that list to the list that's in your IP management system and look for discrepancies as well. So now let's look at some examples to see how this verification process actually works in real life situations. I've got 4 examples here. I'm going to call them case studies that I'm going to use to illustrate how you can use some of these techniques to verify data. The first case study relates to bibliographic data verification. I know a large company, and this is not eBay. Mary, thank you for mentioning us, but this is not eBay. I know a large company that uses outside counsel to file U.S. applications, and then they file their PCT applications using internal staff. And a couple of years ago, the data that the staff was using in their docketing system was unreliable. They did an audit on the key bibliographic information, and they found that 65%, and this is a pretty high number, I wouldn't have expected this, but 65% of the records they audited in their internal system had errors in either the title, the assignee, or the inventor information. Now you can see how this could happen when the company opens the record in their system, and then outside counsel files the original US application, and if they've changed the title or updated the inventors and that information does not get fed back to the company, that information could be incorrect. And that results in the unreliable data in their system, which unfortunately they were then using when they filed their PCT applications, and that was causing errors that they had to correct. So, there's a couple of solutions. A manual solution could have been used to go and manually check the data in their system against the filing receipts and the assignments for each case. But this company had hundreds of matters that needed to be checked that were selected for foreign filing in the next year. So a manual audit wasn't practical. Instead, they verified their data by scraping the key data fields for those matters from PAIR and comparing the data in their docketing system, identifying the discrepancies, and updating the data in their system. And some of the fields that they scraped and compared were the title, the application number, the application date, inventors, confirmation number, attorney docket number, priority date, and class and subclass. All that is scrapable, and they compared that and updated that in their system. So that gave them more reliable data to use when they were preparing the PCT applications. It significantly reduced the number of corrections they had to file after the PCT applications were filed as well. So that's an example of how bibliographic data was verified. There's lots of contexts where that list of fields that's available that can be scraped come up and can have errors, and verification of those data fields against PAIR is a great way to check and make your data more reliable. The next example in my case studies list is the U.S. asset list verification, meaning just making sure you have the right list of matters in your database. I talk to companies all the time that have the same problem. They don't know if they have a complete list of their matters in their system. This problem is easy to address with automated verification solutions, and there's several ways to approach the problem depending on what public data is available. So all the solutions involve double checking your records in your system against something else and determining what records are missing. But there's different ways to do it. So here's a few examples. First, you can verify against the number of matters listed on your customer number. If you have joint customer numbers with your outside law firms, you can compare what's listed on your joint customer number in PAIR to the matters that are listed in your database and make sure that you have a correct list of assets in your database. If the law firm has forgotten to report something out, for example, or they're late in reporting something out, maybe you don't have a particular record in your database, but it's on the customer number and you can find it that way. Another way to check your list of assets, and I mentioned this one on the previous slide, is to check assignment databases, find everything that's assigned to you on these public databases and make sure those are listed in your own database. A third way is to compare your data against your law firm's data. So maybe you don't have a joint customer number with your law firms that you can compare against, but you can ask your law firms to give you the list of information or the list of matters that they're handling and compare that against what's in your database. And then a third way that is actually a great way to do it, but not many people go to this level, is to use what I would call a golden master list to verify the data in your system. By golden master, I mean having an independent list of assets that are separately maintained either by your company or by your law firm or by an independent or by a vendor. That list of assets is all of your assets that you own, you're responsible for, and that list should match what's in your docketing system, and you can use that list to compare against to find missing assets. So, Mary, how did you make sure, when you talked about the split between eBay and PayPal, how did you make sure you had the correct list of assets in your database as you were going through that major split?
So your example of the golden master list is spot on. We had to, first of all, verify that all of the data in our system was correct, but then we had to split all of that data into two separate databases. So in essence, we cloned our docketing system. We had two docketing systems that had that complete master list. And then we had to go into each of those systems and delete out the matters that were not going to that particular company. So on one side, we had a database for PayPal. On the other side, we had a database for eBay. And we had to delete out the designated assets from each. But then how do you verify that those two separate docketing systems are correct? We couldn't verify against customer numbers or assignment data because those were also being updated at the same time. So we used that master list to make sure that, you know, the count in each of those databases added up to the count in the master list, and that the assets that should be in each were indeed in each. And we kept that master list for about 6 months in case we came across errors or discrepancies. We could go back to the master list and say, oh yes, this was this, and it went to this company. So the master list was crucial to a successful split. Yeah.
Sure, and if you didn't have that master list, imagine how easily something could have accidentally been deleted in that process and basically lost.
Exactly.
From your
and
record.
if it were gone, we would not know, you know, where did it go? You know, was it supposed to be here or there? So it was critical. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, thank you for sharing that one. My next case study is on patent family data. And you don't think about verifying patent family data, but that data is also available. And Mary, as we were preparing for this seminar, you told me about a problem you had encountered in the past with missing patent family data in your system. Can you talk about that briefly?
I'm sure paralegals out there will identify with this. We did a very large acquisition, and it came as a master list of patents, many of which were related, but they weren't related on the list. It was just this long list of patents with no family connection. So, you know, when you set up files in your system, you relate them by family, earliest priority date, things like that. And we didn't have any of that. So it was a huge puzzle. You know, how do you open these files and relate these families? So using IMPADOC data, going out to you know, different country patent databases, things like that, was critical for us.
So you were able to take the list of matters that were in your system and then compare those matters to IMPADOC and find out what the patent family relationships were. So probably looking at priority information and things like that to then relate the matters within your system and get those families reunited, basically, right?
Tied together, confirm that we had the correct priority dates, we had the, you know, correct chain for the families, things like that. Yeah.
And also, I assume, make sure you weren't missing any matters that were in those families that might not have been on the list when you got the acquisition data.
That was also a problem, and that did come up, yes.
Yeah. Okay, well, my last one that I'm going to give before we move on to questions is to talk about annuity data verification. Many of these IP management systems are directly connected to a vendor's annuity payment system. And if the data that's essential for the annuity payments is incorrect in the docketing system, then the annuity payment might be missed and rights be lost because that data didn't transfer to the vendor's system, the annuity vendor's system correctly. So depending on the system, there's a number of fields of data that should be verified in your IP management system prior to transferring that data to your annuity payment vendor to ensure that the annuity payment vendor gets the correct information and they are able to make your payments correctly. I know some companies that have processes, regular processes, particularly monthly, to go through the data in their IP management system and make sure that key data fields that are used to trigger what gets passed to their annuity vendor are correct. So for example, if your system has a pay, don't pay field, instruction field in it, and you are on a default pay everything, what if somebody incorrectly changes a pay instruction to don't pay, and that matter doesn't get transferred to your annuity vendor. That's an easy thing to audit by just running a monthly report and looking for anything that has a don't pay instruction in that particular field, and then going in and verifying and making sure that that should correctly be marked as don't pay. Other fields that are important to audit are things like the foreign associate. If you have a particular foreign associate that the payments are being made through, you need to make sure you've got that information in the particular parties fields within your database. If it's missing or incorrect, you can find that with a monthly audit by running reports and looking and verifying that data. So there's a number of critical data fields for annuity matters that are easy to audit, and it's a very wise thing to audit on a monthly basis to eliminate the possibility of errors in the data transfer to your annuity vendor. Mary or Tyler, do you have anything else to add on any of these examples or on the annuity data verification?
I don't. That was a really nice discussion, though.
The only thing that I would add is one of the key fields that you need to make sure that you verify is that the annuity provider is actually part of the data you're verifying. So if you're careful to make sure everything's in there and you don't add the annuity provider, they may or may not get the data. We're on an automatic scrape, so if the annuity provider isn't in your database, they just don't get the information. So,
and that's a good point, particularly for anybody who uses Foundation IP, right, Mary? Because Foundation IP has a specific field for the annuity payment provider. And if that field is not updated with the name of the provider, it might not get pulled over by that provider if they're pulling the data out of your system electronically, correct?
Correct.
Well, these are great examples, and we could go on and on. I find this stuff really interesting, so I could talk all afternoon, but I want to keep us moving. And at this point, if there are any questions, we will take questions. And just a reminder that you can submit questions using the Q&A button on the control bar on your screen. It'll give people a minute to see if we have questions coming in. Okay, so I had a question about best practices for minimizing human error, and then that individual said they got their question addressed, so I'm going to pass that one. If you wanted more, please put a follow-up in the queue, but I'm going to mark that one as answered. And then the next question is, how do you verify the data? But that was submitted during the program, and I believe Prasad, as we went through the discussion later and we hit on the different verification techniques, we talked about ways to manually verify the data and ways to use automated techniques to verify the data. I think we've covered that, but if not, if you can submit a follow-up, that would be great. Okay, the next question is from Lori. How do you scrape information from pair? Well, in order to, what I mean by the term scraping information from pair, it's a technology solution, and there are companies that have the software tools to be able to go to pair and with their automation, pull large volumes of data out of pair. And they typically are doing that either by going in through individual application numbers and then pulling data fields from those particular records for those particular application numbers, or going in by customer number and pulling records based on the matters that are associated with an individual customer number. But it is a software solution. It's not something that you would do manually. It is a software solution, and there are organizations out there that have the technology to do that. Okay, next question is, what kind of software is available for comparing data electronically? Actually, the comparison itself, it can be done in something as simple as a spreadsheet. if you have the data that you've exported from your IP management system into a spreadsheet, and then you take the data that's been scraped from another source or provided to you from another source that you're going to compare to, those could be set up as simply as different columns in a spreadsheet, and then using the tools in Excel, doing comparisons between those two fields and determining if the data in those two fields matches or doesn't match. And based on that, if the data doesn't match, you can flag it as a discrepancy, and then somebody can go and do a manual review and see if it is in fact a true discrepancy and what needs to be changed, if anything, in the data system. Okay, let's see, next question. Do you recommend that companies have one person that does all of the docketing? That's a great question, and because Tyler and Mary, you've been in the corporate situation, I'm going to turn that one to you on having whether or not you have one person that does all the docketing.
Mary, do you want to take a stab at that first?
Sure, I'll go first.
Okay.
I do not recommend that. First of all, we're all human and everybody makes mistakes, even the best of us. So having two people, being able to bounce ideas and have somebody check your work, I think is critical. It's a lot of responsibility. I think you need at least two people docketing, even in a small group.
Yeah, I was going to add, at Boston Scientific, there are a number of people that do docketing. Really, it's just the sheer volume of the amount of work and data that needs to be docketed. I'd also say, like Mary said, I'd agree, even for a smaller company, I think, it'd be okay to have one person do the docketing, but I'd certainly make sure that there's another person that's familiar with it, as either a backup or to double check it or to train the person. For all those reasons, I'd recommend at least another person that's familiar with it. But I do understand with some of the smaller companies that it's really, there may not be the need to have more than one person to do the docketing.
Great, thank you guys. Another question from Luann. Earlier it was said that this was the second webinar of a series. What was the first, and is that first one recorded and publicly available? The first one, Luann, was 2 weeks ago. The topic was, what was the topic? The topic was, oh shoot, I don't have it in front of me. The topic had to do with the top 3 errors that are, that can happen in your top 3 unrecoverable errors and patent docketing vulnerabilities based on those errors. That webinar is recorded and it's available on the Black Hills IP website. So if you go to the Black Hills IP website and go to the webinars tab, right now you have to scroll down past the list of future webinars and you'll find it at the very end of that page. So you can see that there. Okay, and then the last question is pair data scraping allowed from the USPTO website? I'm not quite sure I follow the question, but certainly I know there's a number of organizations that are accessing that data through the USPTO website, and in that sense, it's certainly available out there as a tool. I'll take a minute to see if we have any other questions, and while we're doing that, I want to tell you about the next webinar. The next webinar in the series is on October 12th at 1 p.m. Central. The topic is Deadly Mistakes, Missing Paris Convention and PCT National Stage Foreign Filing Deadlines, and How to Avoid This. To register for the webinar, go to the Black Hills IP website, and you can register for that one or any future ones. So I don't see any other questions in the queue. I want to thank everyone for participating today, and we hope you join us for the next webinar on October 12th and look at other ones in the Docketing Excellence webinar series. Thank you very much.